The night was silent, yet beneath its stillness moved 48 trucks carrying the weight of betrayal. Not grain, not medicine, but $700 million worth of hidden steel. Rocket launchers cloaked under sacks of rice. It was not a declaration of war, but something colder. A plot designed to suffocate a nation before a single shot was fired. Burkina Faso, a land often dismissed as peripheral, suddenly found itself at the center of a storm written in crates and barcodes rather than treaties. And in that storm stood one man, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who refused to wait for dawn. When the order came from Ouagadougou's command room, it was not panic that moved the troops, but resolve to intercept, to expose, to turn silence into testimony. This was no longer about borders. It was about the dignity of a continent long treated as a warehouse rather than a homeland. Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. Subscribe and walk with the story, because what unfolded on that August night may redefine how the world speaks of Africa. 19th of August. The air was heavy over the southern approaches of Burkina Faso. The kind of heat that presses silence into the soil. At precisely 3:47 in the morning, Captain Moussa Kabor pressed his eyes to the thermal scope and muttered 4 words that would ripple across the continent. There is something wrong. What he saw was not the slow movement of farmers heading to an early market, nor aid trucks loaded with grain. It was a convoy. 48 trucks, headlights dark, plates stripped, slipping along a dirt track near Canary to avoid the main checkpoint. Within minutes, the report reached Ouagadougou. President Ibrahim Traoré rose from his seat in the strategic command, the red glow of a satellite feed reflecting across his face. Scramble special units. Get the drones airborne. Intercept them. Not one round must go astray. Calm, decisive, his words cut through the room. Boots shifted into motion. UVs lifted into the night sky and commando teams crossed scrub land to cut the road ahead. At 4:06 a.m., the convoy was trapped at a 3-way junction near Canalaba. No gunfire, no resistance. The drivers froze in place, some trembling, one attempting to reverse only to be blocked. Then, the first tarpaulin was torn back. Beneath labels claiming agricultural tools lay dark green ammunition crates. Locks cracked open. Silence thickened. Brand new AK-47s glinted in the torchlight. Beside them, M16 rifles sealed in foam casings. Grenade launchers wrapped in oilcloth. Pouches of 7.62mm rounds stacked like grain sacks. One lorry revealed radio jammers, tactical vests, RPG launchers. Another encrypted communications gear. Not a single truck was empty. It was not smuggling. It was mobilization. An arsenal disguised as aid, poised to ignite chaos in a nation already encircled by instability. Back in the command center, General Zerbo's voice came through unflinching. "Mr. President, you need to hear this yourself." The phone passed to Traoré, who listened to Captain Kababor's report. "Sir, this is an aid. It is a rolling armory, a mobile army." Traoré did not hesitate. "Detain every driver, lock down the perimeter, track every plate, every radio signal, map their origins within 2 hours." By dawn, patterns emerged. The trucks had not all come from one place. Some bore false registration from distant provinces. Others had switched SIM cards just hours before. Routes diverged, then converged only moments before the border. It was a puzzle deliberately scrambled to appear chaotic. Yet, the timing betrayed orchestration. Someone had designed the mess. Someone had paid for precision. Inside the room, technicians in hand serial numbers scraped off crates, revealing origins that spanned conflict zones. One batch matched post-Civil War surplus from Libya. Another traced to Yemen. Yet the most shocking discovery lay in pristine boxes stamped faintly with codes from factories under NATO oversight in southern Europe. The question cut through the air like a blade. Who had the power to move such weapons invisibly across borders? And why target Burkina Faso first? The value was staggering. Logistics officers calculated at least $700 million in armaments, without counting encrypted systems, drone parts, or explosives. This was not contraband for profit. It was a declaration silent, but clear that somewhere far beyond Burkina Faso's borders, a decision had been made to destabilize, to remove, to replace. And yet, for all the weight of evidence stacked in crates and manifests, the deeper truth remained hidden. Who financed this shadow convoy? Who authorized its passage through ghost corridors unlocked by any official checkpoint? Who believed that 48 trucks could snake into a sovereign state without consequence? The soil of Burkina Faso had yielded many harvests, but never before had it seen seeds of destruction planted with such precision. That night, as soldiers cordoned off Canalaba and drones scanned the skies for accomplices, a darker realization began to settle in Ouagadougou. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The first door opened in a corridor of betrayal that stretched beyond borders, beyond names, beyond even the horizon of the Sahel. The 48 trucks were stopped, but the real question was yet unanswered. What deeper network lay behind them, waiting in the shadows of the capital itself? The hours that followed the Canalaba interception turned the capital into a theater of revelation. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the National Security Council convened inside Ouagadougou. Ministers, intelligence chiefs, and senior commanders crowded the table, faces tense beneath a fluorescent glare. Traoré did not waste words. "This is not contraband," he said, his palms pressed flat on the map before him. "It is a declaration. We move tonight." Orders rippled outward. By midnight, 23 warehouses across the city had been raided. 17 contained military-grade stockpiles, rifles stacked in pyramids, mortar tubes resting against walls, crates of encrypted radios, camouflage kits, SATCOM rotors still linked to foreign servers. In Warehouse 9A, 4 tons of high-velocity explosive gel were discovered, labeled as mining supplies, but clearly prepared for demolition. In 17C, manuals in French and English were found beneath drone casings. Manuals intended for trained pilots, not civilians. The raids revealed not chaos, but coordination. Forged cargo labels pointed to ports in Abidjan and Kidal. Serial numbers traced to Libya, Yemen, and Europe. And then came the arrests. Among those detained were 2 former ministers, one from Interior, another from Energy. A retired general once responsible for international operations. 3 businessmen whose fortunes stretched across every major contract in Burkina Faso, and 4 foreign nationals, 2 French, 1 American, 1 Israeli, all holding diplomatic passports that did not match any official flight logs. The capital shuddered. Streets whispered with rumors as red alerts kept flashing in the command bunker. Each warehouse cracked open was another layer of deception stripped away. Each arrest another reminder that betrayal did not always wear the uniform of an enemy soldier. Sometimes it sat in cabinet chairs. Sometimes it smiled in boardrooms. Then at 7:12 a.m., a new name entered the chamber. François Bongo. For years, Bongo had been untouchable. A magnate of West African finance, known for donations to international NAS, for his handshakes with foreign investors, for his lavish receptions in European capitals. Now he sat beneath a single light in a high-security interrogation room. No cuffs, no resistance. His presence alone was indictment enough. General Zerbo laid down a classified manifest, intercepted calls, wire transfers from shell accounts in the Cayman Islands, coordinates of warehouses already raided. "Tell us the truth," he demanded. Bongo exhaled, folded his hands, and spoke words that stiffened every spine in the room. This isn't about weapons. It was never about weapons. It was about timing, power, control. Then he uttered 4 more words that froze the chamber. Operation Restore Democracy. A projector flickered on, illuminating maps, ledgers, and code names. The budget, $1 billion. The host city, Accra. The venue, a Sherry Inn hotel. Delegates, Bongo admitted, had come from Côte d'Ivoire. Money had been routed through Paris. And final approval had come from Washington. Tro listened without blinking. And if I fell? He asked quietly. Bongo did not hesitate. A transition council was ready, ministries assigned, uniforms tailored. I was promised Minister of Finance. His voice cracked as he confessed. We were all promised something. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. This was not the work of petty smugglers or rogue traders. It was a transaction scripted in hotel lobbies and wired through offshore accounts. The goal was not simply to destabilize, but to replace, to purchase sovereignty with contracts and foreign signatures. Back in the operations room, intercepted chatter confirmed the scale. Coded messages about Phase 2 deployments in Mali and priority assets in Nigeria. The conspiracy stretched far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. It was a regional fire waiting for ignition. For Traoré, the truth was not paralysis, but propulsion. This was not rebellion, he said, voice sharpened to steel. It was a transaction. He ordered satellite archives reviewed. Every signal from Accra over 6 months scraped. Every warehouse scoured until no shadow remained. Betrayal, he declared, would be confronted, not with silence, but with exposure. Yet, as dawn broke over Ouagadougou, the burden grew heavier. For the first time in decades, the city had seen power stripped naked. Its plans projected on screens, its financiers unmasked, soldiers remained on alert, citizens whispered anxiously, and the international community began to stir. But one truth had already crystallized. Burkina Faso was no longer playing by the old rules. The warehouses had been cracked, the financiers named, but the world had not yet seen the evidence. What would happen when the president unveiled it before the global press? The night of the raids gave way to a dawn heavy with consequence. Across Ouagadougou, shopkeepers opened shutters to find their streets filled with soldiers, armored vehicles idling at junctions, and rumors pouring faster than the morning light. News of the 48 intercepted trucks traveled by radio, word of mouth, and whispered phone calls. What began as shock soon turned into a tide of questions. If such an operation could infiltrate undetected, who inside the state had betrayed the nation, and what other networks lay hidden? Families gathered around battered radios, listening to updates that carried both fear and relief. The fear was obvious. If such weapons had reached their destinations, the country might have been torn apart from within. The relief came from the knowledge that at the last moment, the plot had been caught and dismantled. In markets and mosques, citizens spoke the same refrain. If they had succeeded, our tomorrow would already be ashes. Politically, the revelations were seismic. The arrest of 2 former ministers and a retired general shook the image of governance itself. Confidence in the old elite crumbled. Suspicion bled into every corridor of power. Civil servants asked themselves who among them had played host to shadows. Opposition figures too scrambled to distance themselves from the conspiracy, fearing the stain of association. In a land where political betrayal had long been whispered but rarely exposed, the televised evidence became a mirror no one could avoid. For Traoré, the challenge was double-edged. On one hand, the exposure of betrayal consolidated his image as a leader, alert to danger, and decisive in response. On the other, the scale of collusion revealed how deep the rot had grown. To reassure citizens, he ordered public trials, transparency, and proceedings, and a stream of updates that left no doubt the state would not hide its wounds. Economically, the impact was immediate. Rumors of sanctions from Western partners swirled. Embassies delivered sharp warnings behind closed doors. The threat was clear. Punishment for accusing powerful nations. Punishment for daring to expose crates stamped with foreign barcodes. Yet rather than cowing the streets, the possibility of sanctions galvanized them. Demonstrations of support unfurled across the capital, banners painted with slogans, "Trade not aid," and "Sovereignty is not for sale." The symbolism of what came next mattered more than any communique. In the heart of Independence Square, engineers constructed a towering furnace before cameras before tens of thousands. Traoré lifted the very first AK-47Cs from Truck 1 and cast it into the fire. Sparks burst upward. Metal screamed as it melted. His words cut the air. They wanted war. We will give them schools. One by one, rifles, grenade launchers, and mortar tubes disappeared into flame. Engineers channeled molten metal into mold shaped not for bullets, but for bells. These bells Traoré promised would ring across the nation's classrooms. 100 new schools, 50 health clinics, and 1,000 kilometers of irrigation built from weapons meant to tear the country apart. The gesture was not mere symbolism. It was a national blueprint. For many Burkinabe, the discovery of the plot felt like an Ibrahim Traoré assassination attempt in slow motion. Not only an attack on the man, but on the sovereignty he embodied. By melting the instruments of violence, Traoré signaled that dignity was not to be negotiated in secret hotels or offshore accounts. It would be forged in fire, rebuilt with calloused hands, and placed into the palms of children holding school books rather than rifles. Socially, the act sparked an awakening. Teachers pledged to add resistance national to their curricula, telling the story of 48 trucks as a lesson in vigilance and pride. Parents spoke of it as a new form of Independence Day, one that prevented catastrophe rather than celebrated past liberation. Even skeptics found themselves acknowledging that never before had betrayal been so nakedly exposed, nor dignity so defiantly reclaimed. But the domestic consequences also carried risks. The purge of ministers and businessmen threatened to fracture alliances, to deepen fault lines in a fragile political landscape. Loyalists of those detained whispered about witch hunts. Foreign partners hinted at economic isolation. The balance between justice and stability hung precariously. As dusk fell over the capital, the mood was not triumph, but resolve. The nation had survived one attempt, but vigilance could not end with a bonfire of weapons. In the words of a mother clutching her child at Independence Square, we saw what they'd planned. Now we must guard against what they will plan next. Yet Burkina Faso was no longer alone in this struggle. Eyes across Africa and beyond were fixed on Ouagadougou, waiting to judge, to support, or to undermine. What would the world say when confronted with the evidence? When the press conference doors opened at midday, the stage was set not just for Burkina Faso, but for the watching world. Traoré entered without entourage. Behind him, a wall of screens projecting satellite images of 48 trucks, neatly geotagged. The message was clear. This was not rumor, not speculation, but evidence. Reporters from CNN, BBC, and Reuters fired the first questions. Who was responsible for these shipments? What proof connected the crates to foreign suppliers? Were the detained foreign nationals truly diplomats or operatives in disguise? Calmly, Traoré gestured to his defense chief, who laid out a binder of preliminary tracing. Libya, Yemen, and most unsettling, consignments from factories within NATO, member states dated as recently as 2022. The room stirred, keyboards rattled. A BBC correspondent pressed further. "Do you have corroboration?" Traoré's reply was deliberate. 17 detainees have sworn testimony. One financier admitted coordination meetings in a crate clearance signal from Paris. Strategic directives from Washington. A diplomatic passport is not a license to orchestrate insurgency. Gasps rippled across the chamber. Within minutes, embassies in Ouagadougou transmitted urgent cables back to their capitals. Reactions abroad split along familiar lines. Western partners expressed grave concern and privately warned of economic consequences should accusations escalate. Yet in Moscow, statements of solidarity were swift recognition of Burkina Faso's right to self-defense. Beijing moved pragmatically, offering cyber firewalls and drone jamming technology. Caracas declared the moment Africa's Bolivarian turning point. In Addis Ababa, the African Union envoy observed silently, aware that this confrontation might redefine the Union's credibility itself. Regional voices resonated in unexpected harmony. From Ghana came calls that this should be our template. In Niger and Mali, governments proclaimed that no longer would Africans be armed to destroy themselves. In South Africa, leaders remarked that when children asked what victory looked like, show them this day. The sentiment was unmistakable. An injury to one was being felt as an injury to all. The story traveled far beyond formal communique. Global media outlets looped footage of rifles melted into school bells. An image that leapt across screens with a symbolism that no press release could match. Headlines under Burkina Faso news captured the transformation vividly. Weapons into classrooms, betrayal into dignity, plots into pledges. For sympathetic nations, it was proof that sovereignty could be defended with both steel and symbolism. For skeptical powers, it was an uncomfortable reminder that exposure in daylight is harder to dismiss than whispers in corridors. But even as applause rose in some quarters and condemnation in others, one question remained unresolved. What path lay ahead for a small landlocked state now standing at the center of a storm it had dared to name aloud? The morning after the furnaces roared, a quieter reckoning settled over Ouagadougou. The weapons had been melted, the evidence displayed, the financiers named. Yet for every bell cast from an assault rifle, there remained the looming question of what came next. Three paths stood before Burkina Faso. The first was peril, the threat of sanctions, the tightening grip of economic pressure from powerful capitals unsettled by public accusation. Already cables hinted at suspended aid, delayed loans, the shadow of isolation. For a nation landlocked and resource-dependent, such measures could sting as deeply as bullets. But Traoré had made the wager. Dignity was worth the risk. The second path was solidarity. In name, Bamako, and era, voices of support swelled. "Your fight is our fight," declared one Malian official. Such affirmations hinted at a Sahelian coalition no longer defined by crisis, but by resistance. If neighbors stood firm, the shock of external pressure might be absorbed through partnership. Regional trade, shared security, and coordinated diplomacy could transform what was intended as destabilization into the seed of integration. The third path was renewal. By turning rifles into school bells, Burkina Faso set a precedent that extended beyond symbolism. The promise of 100 schools, 50 clinics, and 1,000 kilometers of irrigation lines carved a tangible vision. Sovereignty is not merely defended at borders, but cultivated in classrooms, hospitals, and fields. If delivered, these projects could transform suspicion into trust, despair into pride, and fragile sovereignty into durable independence. Yet risks remained. Networks of betrayal rarely dissolve after a single raid. Plots once foiled tend to regroup. The intercepted chatter about Mali and Nigeria suggested that the storm stretched far wider than Ouagadougou. Vigilance therefore must become daily practice, not occasional crisis. Traoré himself warned, "This was not the last attempt, but it will be the last time we are unprepared." At home, the question of legitimacy also lingered. Could a young captain who rose through defiance translate emergency leadership into long-term governance? Would public fervor withstand the hardships of sanctions or the grind of reform? In the end, symbols must become policies, and fire must become foundations. Still, the embers glowed with possibility. The square that had watched rifles dissolve into molten metal now pulsed with chants of Africa rise. Children carried miniature bells fashioned from the first melted casings, ringing them as tokens of tomorrow. The metaphor was unmissable. From weapons to wisdom, from shadows to light, the road ahead was uncharted, fraught with obstacles and opportunities alike. The question that lingered over the Sahel was simple yet immense. If one small nation could forge dignity from fire, what was stopping the rest of Africa from doing the same? The fire in Independence Square burned through more than weapons. It seared a new chapter into the nation's memory. Burkina Faso, once spoken of as fragile, stood tall as proof that sovereignty is not a slogan, but a choice made in the hardest of nights. 48 trucks had carried the promise of collapse. Yet, their cargo became the raw material for schools, clinics, and irrigation lines. In that transformation lay the deeper message. Dignity is forged not by what is given, but by what a people refuse to surrender. For Ibrahim Traoré, the danger was not abstract. Each crate of rifles had been a reminder that power can be purchased, that betrayal can be recruited, that a leader can be targeted without a single bullet fired. To many Burkina Faso, the conspiracy resembled an Ibrahim Traoré assassination attempt by stealth designed to replace sovereignty with silence. But instead of silence, the response was fire, testimony, and the ringing of bells across a capital that chose hope over fear. Internationally, reactions remained divided. Yet, the image of molten rifles poured into school bell molds refuses to fade. It is replayed on television screens, shared across social media, and etched into the minds of those who believe Africa's destiny can no longer be written abroad. Tomorrow's Burkina Faso news may speak of pressures, sanctions, or threats, but it will also carry the echo of children lifting bells where guns once lay. This continent will not be defined by any Ibrahim Traoré assassination attempt, but by the classrooms it opens and the futures it protects. The lesson endures. Independence is never gifted. It is guarded. Trade over aid, partnership over pity, sovereignty over submission. These are not slogans for rallies, but blueprints for survival. And as the continent watches from Lagos to Kinshasa, from Addis Ababa to Johannesburg, one question grows louder. If Burkina Faso can turn an arsenal into a classroom, what stops the rest of Africa from doing the same? Do not merely watch this story, carry it forward. Share it with someone who doubts Africa's future. Comment your vision of the next chapter, and subscribe not as an act of habit, but as a commitment to walk with this journey of dignity and defiance.